Welcome to part 7 of the Under 1000 King's Gambit course. So far, we have only covered the accepted King's Gambit, which is the case that black takes our f-pawn here. And this is in fact the best and most common response being played about half of the time. But what do we do if black fears the gambit enough that he decides he doesn't want to play that way? Well, this is good for us. We need to study a few lines, but should be able to get a solid position, though it may be less exciting than some of the accepted lines are. Let's start by looking at knight to c6, which is played 22% of the time in this position. Black doesn't want to play the gambit and would rather just defend his e-pawn. Here, we instinctively always and forever will play knight to f3. This move defends the h4 square from the queen. This is a significant threat anytime we push the f-pawn. It is okay to leave this central tension a while. It would be a mistake for us to take the pawn in the center. Because it lets the queen in, we have to block the check, but it results in a fork of our king and rook. So we always get our knight out to f3. After which black has several responses. He can actually take the gambit pawn now, which transposes us to a position we have seen before, and we just play like normal. Interestingly, this is the most common move. Black declines the gambit and then soon after decides to accept it, which seems silly, but really it doesn't make any difference. I suppose black is hoping you will forget the knight f3 move to give him some good attacking chances. A line we haven't considered yet is d6. This is black once again saying that king gambit lines are too exciting for him and he would rather just play solid and avoid any trouble. This isn't exactly fun for either side, and both sides will probably have equal chances in the middle game. But we still have some opening play in front of us. Once again, we are not worried about this tension in the center. Taking the pawn would get us nowhere. It is best to leave it, and if at any point black takes our pawn, then we are prepared with our king gambit style play to punish him for it. Here it is best for us to get our bishop to c4. Black has a couple of options here, but we aren't going to spend a ton of time with this position. And the reason is because play is very simple. Neither side has any threats. Play is just solid. Our plan now is to simply castle, support our center, and open up our bishop with d3, get our knight out, and then play into a middle game. There's not much you can do as far as creating threats is concerned here. So congrats, you made it out of the opening, and like most chess games, the deciding factor will be good middle and endgame play. Let's look a little deeper at the most common move here, mostly because there is one point I want to make. Black plays the natural bishop to g4. In a similar position in a past lesson, we played the idea of bishop takes f7, with the idea that it lures the king out, and we are able to move our knight away with check and capture the free bishop. It is very important to note that that idea does not work here, so don't try it or you will end up losing. The reason why is that the knight actually can't give the check that we want to. Can you see why? If we take the pawn, the king recaptures. We give the check, hoping to capture the bishop, but black can actually play a counterintuitive move of queen takes knight. This works because the bishop is looking at our queen. We can't take his bishop because it is defended by the queen. So we have to take his queen, but he gets ours in return. And we are down the exchange and frankly have a horrendous position. So let's avoid that and just play normal. And normal in this position just means castle. Black will probably just develop in some way. And we can play d3 and go through with normal development. But let's look at one more common threat black can make in these kinds of positions. Black tries to attack our knight a second time. We have several defenders, but none of them are pieces we really want to take back with, as it would lead to going down material or opening our king. We can't add defenders to the knight short of playing bishop to e2. An okay move. We can't move our knight away because it is pinned, so black thinks he has us in a pickle. However, this move was a clear mistake for black. You remember the line we just looked at where the bishop captures the f-pawn? We found out that it didn't work because we can't give the knight check on g5 like we want to. However, there is now the subtle difference in the position of the rook being on the f-file. Try to play out the line in your head a couple of times to see why it works. Bishop takes pawn. King takes back, we give a check, the queen takes, and we take back with the pawn. Wait a minute. If you have seen all of that, then you know that this pawn move is actually a discovered check. Let me show you. This is check and black has to move the king rather than take our queen, like in the previous line. This is crushing for us. That was a very subtle difference in position. It may be hard to remember which cases you can take the f7 pawn with the bishop and which you can't. It's always important to run through the line in your head very carefully and thoroughly before playing. This is where visualization skills are very important. Okay, that was about all the excitement we are able to squeeze out of the d6 line. Just play solid and develop normally, basically. Let's look at the next most common move, knight to f6. This move is easily refuted. Black simply forgot about his e-pawn, which lacks sufficient defending power. If we take it now, black is unable to capture back, because the pawn is supported by the knight. And it's important to note that our knight is free to move as he wishes right now, because the dangerous diagonal we keep talking about is not currently open. This means that we just got a free pawn and a free chance to give a threat. Black has no good options for his f-knight, and the computer recommends just moving him right back to g8. It's important to note that taking our e-pawn is not an option for black. If that's what he was planning, then he is in for a dance party, because his horses will be dancing all over the board. We simply push d3. Attacking the knight, he only has the one escape square, since everything is already controlled by us. So he retreats, but we continue to chase him. He will probably move back, or he will find further suffering, which allows us the chance to invite the other knight to the dance party, pushing the same pawn a third time in a row. And again, black doesn't have a lot of retreating options for his knight, so he will probably go to b4, just begging to be chased away again. And now the knight will probably move to his only safe square on a6, where we can disrupt black's pawn structure and continue chasing knights while getting our pieces out. Just imagine the pain your opponent must be feeling at this point. Okay, well, knight f6 is a lot of fun for us, and we love to see that. But another fun one played 7% of the time is bishop to c5. Black thinks again that he doesn't need to defend his e-pawn, because this time the dangerous diagonal is open, and so our knight has to stay on f3 to avoid trouble there. And that is correct, mostly. The other way we can defend h4 is by keeping our f-pawn on f4. This way, if the queen comes in, we can push g3, and the f-pawn acts as a sort of wall blocking the queen from taking the e-pawn. So we need to either have our pawn on f4 or knight on f3. We have to be careful not to move both of those pieces. So we can take advantage of the weak e-pawn a different way now that the bishop is on c5. When black recaptures, we don't recapture the knight with the f-pawn, as that would allow the queen to infiltrate. But we do have the center pawn fork, a common opening idea, to gain material back. Black can sacrifice a piece for the pawn to get some material out of the fork, and we end up dead even in material. Though you can easily see that our position is more desirable with our open bishops and central control. You might notice that the knight is being attacked, and once he moves away, we will be able to capture the g-pawn. This is the most likely scenario at this level. However, black has one high-level trick in the bag he can play here. Pushing g3 would be a fatal blunder here, because that would open us up to a royal fork. And we go down a queen. So this time, let's just block with the queen to avoid that. And here we find ourselves in an advantageous endgame position, with our advanced king and pieces ready to come out. Let's look at another solid move with a similar idea to d6, but slightly weaker. f6 supports the e-pawn in a different way. Generally, moving the f-pawn like this is weak because it yields some of the king's safety. This is no exception. There's no immediate way to punish this, however. So we simply carry through a normal plan of getting our bishop out, and we are already looking at a win rate of 60%. Not because of any immediate ideas, but rather because of our long-term pressure on the king's safety. We will eventually find a way in once we get more pieces out. Black will develop with something like bishop to c5, the idea being to prevent us from castling But this is fine with us. We will just try to get our queenside pieces out to prepare to castle long. Black blocks his bishop in, so we are able to play the modern idea of knight a4, with the idea to grab black's bishop, reclaiming the ability to castle kingside. Black decides he wants to trade on his own terms, moving the bishop back, so he can at least open up his rook. This is fine with us because we are now able to castle kingside again, and can play the fun center push d4. The d-pawn is sufficiently supported now, and black's strong center will fall if he decides to take somewhere with his e-pawn. Or he will start to be very restricted after d5 if he ignores our threat. We will be able to castle and start an attack. It might continue something like this. We have a plus 1.2 advantage and plenty of attacking chances. And that about covers all of the most common moves. However, there is one move that commonly falls under the radar of 1,000 and under players, but is still important to be aware of because of its strength. That move is the center push d5. This seems like a bit of a chaotic move. There is now a lot of central tension, and we have to do something about it. There are a couple good options, but I like the simple move, e takes d. I like this because we are already comfortable with any e takes f pawn ideas. And playing from here is simple, because this move lures the queen out to a place we can attack it immediately. She has to retreat in some way, but also probably wants to keep an eye on the weak e-pawn, so moves to e6 to defend it. And we simply relieve the central tension to prevent any e4 or discovered check ideas. We play pawn takes in the center. Black will take back with the knight. Here we're almost forced to trade pieces, which is going to take things into an equal endgame. Notice the black queen is eyeing our king, so we just trade knights and queens and move on to the endgame, where hopefully we can get some coordinated attacks going. I do want to look at one last possibility. So instead of playing queen takes pawn here, you might encounter a move that may seem very tricky at first. e4 attacks our knight, but remember, we still have a pawn attacking the black knight. So if we calculate carefully, we will be able to get some material. We take the knight and black does the same. And here's the key moment. You may want to keep going with the pawn capture rampage, but this allows the bishop to come out, which even supports the f-pawn. A much better idea is to take the pawn with our queen, which supports our c-pawn. Black will need to capture our pawn, ruining his pawn structure. And now, you are more than tempted to capture this free pawn, but doing so helps get black's pieces out faster. These pawns aren't going anywhere and will be very hard to defend. It is more of an obstacle to black than a benefit. So like true king gambit players, we ignore the free pawn and just get our pieces out quickly. Alright, that concludes all I want to discuss for the knight c6 king gambit declined lines. In all reality, this move leads to any number of boring variations that involve simple development. There are a few traps and tricks to be aware of, like we discussed, most of which involve the central e-pawns of both colors. Remember, always be aware of the h4 diagonal, and have fun playing these lines. Thanks, and see you in the next one.